It's been about 2 weeks since shooting this video that the Quiet on Set documentary was released. If you haven't seen the documentary, it is a tell-all expose on some of Nickelodeon's biggest shows. In this documentary, you see a recurring character, and that's Dan Schneider. Now, a week after the documentary was released, he came up and he did a public apology, or what seemed to be an apology. Rather, it was a 20-minute conversation that he had with a former employee.
And it made me feel awful and regretful and sorry.
There was something about this that didn't sit right with me. So in this video, we're going to look at the communication techniques behind the apology. What was he intending to say? How was he intending to make his audience feel? And how exactly did he do it? I know apologies can be tough, but there was something about this one that stood out to me. Let's look into it. We're going to start from the first second and go all the way to the end of the conversation, pulling out short clips and processing this together. If you want to see the whole thing uninterrupted, I'll put the link in the description below. In addition, the whole reason I make this content is I know we want to become clear and confident communicators that can articulate the ideas that are core to us so we can live fuller lives. If that fascinates you, I'd love for you to subscribe. Without further ado, let's see how the conversation starts.
Hey, it's Boogie. I play T-Bo on Nickelodeon's iCarly. I got a chance to watch the Quiet on Set program, and I reached out to Dan to see if it was something that he'd be willing to discuss. I'm pleased to say that he said yes. Dan, how are you?
I'm okay. I really appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about what we saw over the last 2 nights.
I'm really glad you're here because I believe this is important.
For sure.
We've got a lot of things to unpack. But before I dive into my...
Okay, I'm going to stop here real quick because I was writing down the words that were standing out to me. First off, the setting, it is a casual conversation. It looks like it's in Boogie's house. Boogie is a former employee of Dan Schneider. He was on iCarly as T-Bo. He has cue cards in his hand, so this is more than likely a conversation that is going to be guided by prepared questions, which more than likely, my hunch, these questions were cleared by Dan, so he knows what's coming down the pipeline. Also, the fact that this is a conversation. Whenever we think of apologies, we don't typically think of conversations. Something fascinating about apologies are, it's a pretty tough rhetorical task. Apologies aren't easy, and they're not supposed to be easy because it requires a vulnerability, and typically an apology means we did something wrong. Apologies are taught to us regarding like social development at a very young age. For instance, say please, say you're welcome. Hey, you need to say you're sorry. So it's ingrained to us that apologies are important. But to have an apology built out and facilitated through a conversation is interesting to me, especially someone that used to work for you on a Nickelodeon show. And that's kind of what's in question. Now, this is a strategic thing to do, but the words in the first 30 seconds sets a tone I wasn't expecting. For instance, Boogie says, I got a chance to watch the documentary. I'm so glad Dan was willing to be on the show. I am pleased. Dan says, hey, I appreciate you reaching out. Boogie says, I am glad. He says, this is going to be very important. So it sets this scene with this positive mood, which is unexpected for an apology. Regarding apologies, a good apology has a few different things. The biggest thing a good apology has is empathy. And we're going to see whether or not we see that in this apology. So we're setting the scene here.
What we saw over the last 2 nights.
I'm really glad you're here because I believe this is important.
For sure.
We've got a lot of things to unpack. But before I dive into my list of topics that I'd like to discuss, is there anything you'd like to start off with?
Absolutely. Watching over the past 2 nights was very difficult. Me facing my past behaviors, some of which are embarrassing and that I regret. And I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology.
Okay, we're 30 seconds in, but there's stuff that we can't miss. The first thing is that whenever he was given the platform at the very beginning of, hey, what do you want to say? He says, it was difficult for me to watch that back. He says, I was embarrassed, I regret, and again, I was embarrassed. One of the major tenets of a good apology is also responsibility. So you want to take responsibility of the actions, right? And the big reason why we apologize is we believe that The cost of not apologizing outweighs the gain of us apologizing. For Dan, the cost of him not apologizing is a very tarnished reputation, which in his industry and in a lot of industries, a reputation is very important. So, of course, he's going to apologize. But coming from the gate, a lot of the emotions that he's talking about are very eye-centered. It's myopic on his personal experience, which stands out to me, rather than the victims or the people who are negatively affected. And then immediately after that, let's talk about the massages. So it seems like it's going to be a shotgun blast of apologies, going from the first key scene to the last key scene of this documentary series.
Ever put in that situation. And even additionally, I apologize to the people who were walking around Video Village or wherever they happened, because there were lots of people there who witnessed it who also may have felt uncomfortable. So I owe them an apology as well.
Yeah. Dan, talk to me about the writer's room. From what I saw, not cool.
No. And I'm going to cut you off, but if I can cut right to the chase, let me just say, no writer should ever feel uncomfortable in any writer's room. Ever. Period. The end. No excuses. Most TV writers, comedy writers have been in writers' rooms, and they are aware that a lot of times there are inappropriate jokes made and inappropriate topics come up. But the fact that I participated in that, especially when I was leading the room, it embarrasses me. I shouldn't have done it. And I can tell you why it hurts really bad for me. I remember very clearly my early experiences, my first experiences in the entertainment business. I was green, I was scared, I was excited. It meant the world to me that I was getting those opportunities. And I went in and I got lucky because they were great. My first couple of experiences were fantastic. And the fact that I didn't pay that forward to every employee that walked through my door, it hurts my heart, because I should have. And I wish I could go back and fix that. In the writer's room, there's no doubt that sometimes those jokes went beyond the pale, and I said things that went too far, or made practical jokes that went too far, and that was wrong. And that was because, I was an inexperienced producer, I was immature, wouldn't happen today, but I'm just really sorry it happened.
Yeah. And then Boogie prompts him, well, what about the writer's room? So it does seem like it's going to be a shotgun blast of apologies. Going from massages to the writer's room, we'll figure out what topic is next. And I don't think this is the most effective way to apologize, right? Because the premises of a great apology, we said empathy, we said responsibility, timing, and then change. And he mentioned a little bit, he said the same word again, embarrassing. This is embarrassing. It is a emotion that you experience yourself. It's not a other-centered emotion. There needs to be a bit more empathy. He did talk about, he said no writer should feel that way in a writer's room, but this conversation or this apology setting, it's not necessarily coming off to me as being vulnerable or being genuine. It's more of like, hey, let's address all these different things and let's hear you give lip service on this.
Now, we know you've had a lot of success over 2 decades. Thousands of people have worked with you, for you. Okay. Let's speak directly to the people who did not have a good experience with you.
Okay, I would like to speak to those people, because I hate that anybody worked for me and didn't have a good time. You know me. You've been on my sets. Look, I've had some employees that have worked for me for 10 years, some more than 20 years, who would work with me again, but not everybody. There's still a significant number.
You know me, you've worked on my sets, he says to Boogie. So it makes sense to me now why Boogie's the one who's facilitating and hosting the conversation, and why this video is on Dan Schneider's personal YouTube channel. Because Boogie is a testament of Dan's ethos, his credibility. Boogie says, you've been a very successful person. You've had 2 decades of success. And whenever I'm thinking about apologies, I don't think it's going to be the most effective way to do it by hedging your success onto the apology, regardless of how successful you are or how successful you aren't. The apology needs to be genuine. And with persuasion, because an apology is an act of persuasion, you have your 3 main points, right? You have your ethos, your pathos, and your logos. For some of you, we're going back to school here. But your ethos is your credibility. That is who you are. You can't be trying to persuade someone if the person doesn't even trust you. So Boogie gets to build that credibility. And then we see a little bit of logos here, but we're going to see even more of it going in the future, because when we talk about persuasion, I'll show you what persuasion looks like. Let me make sure I get this in the frame. Persuasion is like this. You have a line, and in the middle you have someone who could care less. They are neither for nor against. But a lot of people used to love Dan Schneider. He was all the way over here. A lot of favorability. But recently he's gone all the way down here. And whenever you go this way, you lose favorability. Whenever you go this way, you gain in favorability. Persuasion oftentimes is not about bringing somebody from here all the way to up here. Rather, it's bringing them from here all the way to over here, right? Because an apology is you're presenting a new perspective with the goal of reducing anger, reducing the desire for revenge, and hopefully building trust. So we see this persuasion taking place real time by a pretty blatant ethos, like credibility build there. Hey, you've been successful for 20 years. You've been on my set before. You know me, which stood out to me as interesting.
Brother didn't have a great time working for me, so my batting average isn't nearly high enough in that area. And the way they wouldn't get the best of me is that I would let the pressure of doing 40 or even more episodes per year, I would let that pressure get to me, which a good boss should never, ever do.
Was there specific things that you were doing?
Sure. I would snap at people sometimes. I would be snarky when I could have given them a nicer answer. I would not give people the time that they needed. I would be in too big a hurry to get on to the next thing I had to do. And watching that show, it made me, there were so many times I wanted to pick up a phone and call some of those people and say, I'm so sorry and let's talk about it. And I wish you'd had a better time and I wish I could have shown you a better experience.
Yeah. Now, you've written hundreds of episodes.
Okay, another ethos credibility build. You've written hundreds of episodes. So you obviously know what you're doing, Dan. That's what Boogie's saying. But he talks about how the pressure he was feeling. He said, I had to do a ton of episodes. So that is like a logical appeal. Hey, have you ever been under pressure before? Have you ever done things you may have regretted doing because the pressure was really heavy on you? This is a logical appeal to help people better understand some of his actions.
Thousands of jokes have been told.
Yeah.
But currently where we are, some people think that some of those jokes are inappropriate for children. What do you think of that?
All these jokes that you're speaking of, that the show covered over the past 2 nights, every one of those jokes was written for a kid audience because kids thought they were funny and only funny. Okay? Now we have some adults looking back at them 20 years later through their lens, and they're looking at them and they're saying, oh yeah, I don't think that's appropriate for a kid show. And I have no problem with that. If that's how anyone feels, let's cut those jokes out of the show. Just like I would have done 20 years ago or 25 years ago. I cut it. I want my shows to be popular. I want everyone to like it. The more people who like the shows, the happier I am.
Yeah.
So if there's anything in a show that needs to be cut because it's upsetting somebody, let's cut it.
So I think it's big for you to say with your work.
The more people who watch the show, the happier I am. If something's going to negatively affect viewership of a show, then I'm going to cut it. This makes sense from a producer, right? It's his job to be able to produce shows that have great ratings to where they entertain a ton of people and the channel's happy. But I don't think it's the proper time to talk about that. I think the proper time to focus on something, it would be focusing on the other people who were negatively affected about this experience. And also, whenever you look at Boogie, he prompts the question, hey, there's been thousands of jokes that have been written, but some people may say these jokes are out of pocket. What do you think about that? Queuing up somebody with that open-ended question of what do you think, it taps into the thought world, right? And let's say like theoretically, it taps into the theoretical world. But an apology is not about the theoretical world, right? An apology is about the real-time, practical world, because a deed was done in the real-life world that needs to be rectified and someone needs to be apologized to. And the more I watch this, the more I wonder, what is the main intention of this conversation? If it's a public apology, I imagine you'd have it a certain way. Or if it's in a defense of Dan Schneider's character and his credibility, then you're having it another way. And you see those conflict here, which produces a bad piece of content because you got to lean one way or the other, right? You can't really thread the needle with an apology, or you can, but it doesn't feel genuine. And the tough thing about apologies are good apologies heal, but bad apologies actually hurt. They make the situation worse.
If it's viewed as that today, you don't have a problem.
Cut it. Cut it.
I mean, that's a solution.
The last thing I want to ever do is put any content in a show that's going to upset my audience and make them want to turn off the TV. Why would I ever want to do that?
That makes sense. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of elaborate on something.
Okay.
The thought process from the series is you had the power to just write a joke, and no matter what, it's going on TV. You just had that type of power. Is that true?
The notion that I had the power to just produce whatever I wanted and have it air is completely false.
Okay.
There were many, many levels of scrutiny. Okay. We had executives in LA. We had executives in New York.
So two coasts.
Two coasts
Okay.
of approval.
Coasts.
Yes. And by the way, approval at every stage, really.
Okay.
And I'm talking about wardrobe. I'm talking about makeup, sound, sets, dialogue, jokes, everything.
Now, when you say approval, obviously that's a hierarchy, not your colleagues or people in the room. Okay.
No, not my colleagues. No, these are my bosses. Bosses, and then their bosses, and then their bosses.
Logos. Theoretical. You're talking about a conceptual hierarchy here. This is the help us understand why you did what you did. This is the logical appeal. Have you ever had to report to a boss and ever had to do something that you didn't want to do, or maybe subpar content was released or a deliverable didn't get there on time? Well, there's a whole hierarchy there. So he only has so much power here. That's what we're understanding. That's what we're hearing.
And they're approving all of this stuff. Okay? And we're also shooting it in front of all sorts of adults and caregivers and the set teacher and the families. Everybody's watching it. And if anybody had said anything, hey, we don't like that, that's not appropriate, then it would have been cut out.
Now, I'm gonna push back a little bit because the series painted you in this way that you were just the guy that was doing what he wanted. And people were afraid to confront you about things. So just humor me, say that was the case. What would have been the ultimate way to...
Okay. If nobody on the set, if all of the dozens and dozens of adults that were on the set, if they didn't say anything, if my bosses said, if they insisted, you got to make a change here, you got to cut that, I had to do it. I had no choice.
Got it. Now this next one.
All right. Hey, they win in the firefight there. A little cross-examination, right? He says, I'm going to push back. I want you to humor me. What if you did have all that power? To which he says, nah, not a thing, not possible. And that is them trying to walk the line, right? We want to defend the character of Dan Schneider while also apologizing if offense was done to the necessary level of forgiveness needed and forgiveness that's ultimately given. And it comes off, to me, it comes off as a bit tacky, right? Like, hey, I'm going to push back. I'm going to be the bad guy here. You have to shoot me straight. Tell me the truth. That comes off a bit tacky to me.
Now this next one, it kind of hit close to home. Being a new father, I wouldn't be opposed to my child being in the entertainment industry. It doesn't matter what age, yeah? Seeing some of those on-air dares, seeing it now from where you are now in your life, what do you think of that?
I think that some of the on-air dares went too far. I think they pushed the envelope too far. Not all of them, not most of them, but some did. Nickelodeon wanted to do their version of Fear Factor. At the time we were shooting All That, so I was tasked with doing these on-air dares with the All That cast. So we get with the writers and we come up with all these ideas, and it's hard to do because we don't have the budget of Fear Factor, and we can't put the kids in dangerous situations like the adults are put in. So it was hard to come up with stuff. But we would come up with all these ideas of dares they could do. We would give them to the network, and they would say, tell us the ones that were okay.
Right.
Those are the ones we shot. Those are the ones that aired. At the time, I had no indication that any kid ever had a problem with them. But when I was watching the show over the past 2 nights, I now know that there were kids who did have problems with the on-air dares. And it breaks my heart. And I'm so sorry. I am so sorry to any kid who ever had to do a dare or anything that they didn't want to do or weren't comfortable doing. We went out of our way to make sure they were safe and that everything was done properly. But if a kid was scared and didn't want to do it, kids shouldn't have had to do it.
Yeah.
Period. The end.
Right.
And if I had known at the time, I would have changed it on the spot.
Okay. Period. The end. One of the first indications, there's been a few, but this is one of the strongest indications. He says, at the time, I didn't know, but he says this, it breaks my heart. So that's an indication of personal emotion, right? Nobody wants their heart broken. So this is the pathological appeal. We're appealing to emotions. And something that stands out to me here is we're about halfway through the conversation, but there's been a lot more logical thought, theoretical. Let's talk about this. What about this? What about that? Then actual feeling or emotional. And one of the basic premises of an apology is vulnerability, right? We are laying down our shields and we are expressing our genuine concern. So by saying, hey, I was heartbroken, that's an example of that. But it does communicate something that the majority of this conversation is the logical side of the house. And I know humans process emotions differently. There isn't one set way to process an emotion. But typically with an apology, you often want to lead with emotion by addressing emotions first, and then maybe after the fact, maybe not even during the same occasion, because timing's a really big piece about apologies. Then you can address some of the logical side of the house. And different people walk different lines here, but we can definitely see that predominantly this is a logical explanation.
Now, we also saw the series highlight two former writers' viewers, two women, who spoke about a wage discrepancy. Now, I know that you don't divvy out salaries. Talk to me about that part.
Well, you're correct. I have nothing to do with paying writers. I never have. I've never made a writer's deal. And of all the writers I've been in a writer's room with, I never even knew how much most of them were getting paid.
Yeah, but we saw these two women who were writers for you sharing one salary. How does that happen?
It's very simple. There's a common practice in television when hiring writers. If you have a spot for a new writer, sometimes you'll go to two writers and say, hey, if you two new writers for your first job are willing to share a salary, you can both have the job. They have the opportunity to say, yes, that sounds good, or no, no, thank you. In this case, it was two women writers. I've done another show where that teaming was done with two male writers, and they split a salary. I did another show where it was a male and a female writer, and they split a salary. So,
and these are all first-time writers.
All first-time writers looking for their first gig.
Got it. Now, in the series, they also highlighted two black...
Okay, one thing that's standing out to me is like when we were talking about shotgun apologies, all these different topics at once, he mentioned, hey, let's talk about two female writers splitting a salary. And it took about 50 seconds to answer that question, and now they're on to the next one. But it's an explanation. So if that's truly the case, then, hey, here's how it is. Here's how it goes. Here's why that was said, and here's why it wasn't. Again, the logical explanation is really leading the way here.
Black actors who said that they felt overlooked. Now, I want to be clear. I'm never going to speak on anyone else's journey. Yeah, I can talk about my experience, how my experience was with you, what I saw prior to working with you. But again, I don't want to speak on anyone's journey. I saw you be honored for diversity in your work.
Yes. And the reason for that is diversity has always been very important to me in my shows. If you go back to the very first Nickelodeon show I ever made, that's very evident, as it is in the second one, and then the first movie I ever made for Nickelodeon, which starred Kenan and Kel. And every show I did after that had a lead black actor in it. I'm very proud of that. It's very important to me. And not only am I proud that they were in my shows, I'm exceptionally proud of the achievements they've had beyond my shows. And they've gone on to bigger and better things. And that gives me a great sense of pride.
Well, something that really kind of bothered.
Pride.
It's very important.
And then he's proud. You can see emotionally he's smiling, which you wouldn't expect in a conversation about a public apology with this tell-all documentary in response to. But we better understand the intent of the conversation, right? It's to help introduce us to the information and the perspective that can change the way we view this whole situation. We are given the logistics. We're given the technicalities of how things work. And rather than apology, this is more of an explanation. And you can do that, and you can still apologize. But to me, I feel like you need to pick a lane.
Important to me. And not only am I proud that they were in my shows, I'm exceptionally proud of the achievements they've had beyond my shows. And they've gone on to bigger and better things.
Me being there, I knew the dynamic was trust. I understood that in situations where they may have had turmoil, whether it be with their families, whether it be other castmates, they came to you versus how they made you look. With that said, Amanda Bynes was brought up in the series and her emancipation and how you were involved in that. Can you talk to us about it a bit?
Sure. Amanda was between the ages of 16 and 17, and she wanted to get emancipated from her parents, which was a fairly common thing with successful young actors, at least at the time.
Sure.
And she wanted...
Okay, so what? We're 11:36 in. The apology's almost over, or the conversation's almost over. I shouldn't call it an apology. The conversation's almost over, and we've hit so many different topics. This is the shotgun approach. We're going to get 20 minutes whenever you're talking about all of these topics is a pretty short amount of time, but they're going for it. They've cleared the cue cards. They're like, let's get on with this conversation.
Wanted that for herself. So she turned to her team, which included her lawyer, her agent, her manager, her publicist, me, because she included me as part of her team, thought of me that way. We supported her. She tried to get emancipated and ended up not working out. She didn't.
Well, since we're here, let's stay here for a moment. There was also an incident where she had ran away from home, if you would. Can you talk to us a little bit just to clear the air of exactly what happened in that situation?
Yes. One night, it was very late, well after midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning. Phone rang. I answered. It was Amanda. She was upset. She was in distress. She had had some conflict with her parents, I think her father, and she called me. I was immediately concerned about her safety. I called someone who I knew was fairly nearby. That person was able to go and pick her up. Then I knew she was safe. I felt better. She ended up being taken to the police.
Well, regardless of what some people may think, I think it's only positive that you are there for people when they need you. That said, let's talk about...
That's important for us to note. He says, regardless of what some people may think, taking defense for Dan, this is a casual conversation between two friends. So we're getting that vibe. Another thing to mention, I haven't mentioned this yet, but multicam editing, they have a wide shot on the both of them. And then they have cameras off to the left and to the right. Like whenever I'm talking to you, I have a camera straight on. I have a camera over here. I have a camera down here. I don't know if you could see that, but you can see my hand here. Now, whenever you edit these conversations, you can put the wide shot on the both of them. You can see them both interacting. But then you can do several takes between each question because we don't know the editing. The audience doesn't know the editing. Because you could do a take and it doesn't work, or you can do another take, and then you just cover it up by cutting to the next person. And I'm curious about this. I really wonder. I won't be able to tell. I won't be able to see the uncut footage. But I wonder how many takes they had to do, if any. I know that I'm making an assumption that they did have to do takes. But I do wonder, like, hey, let's try that question again.
Some of the things that have just been swirling forever.
Okay.
You were banned from your set.
Never happened. That is a false rumor.
What happened?
Add it to the list of false rumors.
Talk to me. What happened?
They were adult actresses at the time, and they had their own specific reasons for not wanting to do the show anymore. I'm not judging that. It got tense, and what they don't know, maybe, is I did everything I could to make that show go away. My producer partner at the time, we would call and say, this is not a good situation.
Okay.
So I decided I'm going to do what most showrunners do, which is you're not on the set. There's a director there to shoot it. I'll go up to the writer's room. I'll work on the next script. But because everybody was so used to me caring about every detail of every show so much, for me not to be on the set, maybe some people thought I got banned.
So it was more of an assumption because this guy's usually here and now he's not.
I don't know if it was an assumption. I don't know if somebody thought they were making me look bad by saying I got banned from the set. I have no idea.
Okay.
All I know is I was never banned from the set.
Yep. The darkest part of this series.
Okay. Well, we're almost done with the apology and they're getting to the darkest part of the series. They just want to let people know, like, hey, don't make assumptions.
Peace. discuss child predators. Now, I want to make sure that we clear a couple of things up.
Okay.
Brian Peck was not hired by you.
No, I did not hire Brian Peck.
This was a Tolan Robbins production?
Yeah. And when Drake and I talked and he told me what had happened, I was more devastated by that than anything that ever happened to me in my career thus far. And I told him, I'm here for you. What do you need? Which Drake mentioned in the show that we watched last night. And next, I heard that he went to court when this guy was being tried, Peck. And when Drake walked in, he saw 50 people sitting on the side of the courtroom supporting Peck. A lot of them pretty famous. Of course, Drake was devastated that happened. And even more disappointing, 41 of those people wrote letters for Peck, character letters, praising him for who he was and asking for leniency. And they knew that he was guilty. They knew he had confessed to some degree. And they still did this. That's baffling that adults would do that.
Yeah.
He says it's baffling. He says he was more devastated at that moment than any other time in his career. He shares the story about 50 people writing character testaments for someone who ultimately got put behind bars for being a child predator. I think we're getting near the end of the conversation, but it's one of the more stronger moments regarding the apology side of the house. Whenever you start sharing stories and you talk about how seeing that person made me hurt so bad, you're flexing your empathy muscle a little bit.
And I don't know if people know this, but Drake's mom, a lovely woman who I stay in contact with this day, she came to me at the time and she said, Dan, I'm not good with words like you are. And would you help me with my speech for the judge? And I said, of course. And I did. And he ended up going to prison and serving his time. And yeah, that was probably the darkest part of my career. And here's the kicker that I really don't get. After he got out of prison and was, to my knowledge, a registered sex offender, he was hired on a Disney Channel show.
That was a pretty quick cry. I know I don't really know the duration of the average cry, but we're getting into the emotion side of the house. What are we at? 1611. I don't want to lose my place. I know we've been here for a while.
And prison and serving his mercy with my speech for the judge.
Talking about the parents saying, hey, could you help me? This is the emotion. He is eliciting emotion. We're near the end. I would imagine it would be much more effective if you start with stuff like this. Like I said, this could be several takes of practicing this cry. It could not be several takes. It could be the original take. I am not able to confirm or deny, but I'm just like speculating in my head, wondering why start with the logical explanation whenever you can start with the actual emotional story side of the house. And I think the answer to that is that wasn't the point of this. I think the point of this was more to defend the character of Dan Schneider rather than to actually explore the emotional impact for the other people involved. Let's go back to where we were.
I don't understand that. I don't understand.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, man. Are you okay? You want to take a minute?
Yeah, I'm all right. Let's keep going.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we really unpacked some important things. We set the record straight on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Before I let you get out of here, I appreciate the vulnerability that you use in knowing that there's definitely things that you would have and should have done differently.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed? Anything that if you could go back and navigate the journey differently, what would that look like?
Yeah, there's definitely things that I would do differently. One that I think would be really, really important is when you're hiring young actors, minors, to work in television, I would suggest that we have a licensed therapist there.
All right. We're nearing the end. Things he'd do differently. One of the biggest components of a great apology is that you indicate change for the future. It's like the idea of repentance. Repentance meaning I'm changing my ways. I was going this way. Now I'm going that way. But I cannot not address. He says, I'm really grateful for your vulnerability. Before we move on, are you okay? That is a gracious host. That regarding conversation, especially very emotional conversation, you want to ensure that the other people's emotional state, you want to be thinking about that. But it just does not come off to me as the real deal. Like, are you okay? Can we move forward? You've been incredibly vulnerable, and I'm really thankful for that. It makes me raise my eyebrow and think, like, has he? Like, I don't know if I've really gotten the core of who he is. It's like if you've ever been to therapy and you sit down, you start talking for 20 minutes and the therapist is like, but like, what's actually going on? And then 20 minutes later, you're crying because you actually said the thing. Like, we're not there yet. We haven't gotten there. And maybe it's because it's too short, but I don't think that's why. I think instead, this was a scripted conversation with certain questions to briefly touch different subjects and not actually touch what's really going on.
To oversee that process for the specific reason of making sure that those kids really wanted to do this job, that they really wanted to be on television. Yeah. Maybe they should even be informed about what that means. What's it going to mean if you're famous? What's that going to mean on social media? What's it going to mean within your family? Let them find out. And then that way, if a kid doesn't want to be on a TV show, they can opt out. Yeah. That psychologist, that therapist could come to us and say, this kid doesn't want to do it, or their parents aren't understanding of what's going to come. And then we could avoid the mistake of ever putting a kid in a TV show that didn't want to be there.
This is an interesting expression of future change. He essentially says, leave it up to the kids. Have a child therapist help the kids walk through whether or not they want to be a TV star. I know I'm supposed to be doing a communication analysis, but I think a lot of kids want to be TV stars. And I think that answer is pushing the buck. You are pushing the buck on the kids. And this whole entire conversation is about the kids being in a power dynamic that was toxic and unhealthy. So that stands out to me as a really interesting answer, especially coming near the end of the shotgun apology where we've hit all of these different topics. And you talk about like, well, let's leave it up to the kid. That way we don't get kids who can't handle it.
And additionally, the main thing that I would change is how I treat people and everyone. I definitely at times didn't give people the best of me. I didn't show enough patience. I could be cocky and definitely overambitious and sometimes just straight up rude and obnoxious. And I am so sorry that I ever was. And when I watched the show, I could see the hurt in some people's eyes, and it made me feel awful and regretful and sorry. I wish I could go back, especially to those earlier years of my career, and bring the growth and the experience that I have now and just do a better job and never, ever feel like it was okay to be an asshole to anyone ever. Look, I wanted to make funny TV shows for kids, and we definitely did that. But if I could go back, I would get it done in different ways. I'd just be nicer as often as possible and listen more to the people on my team. And I would do everything that I could to make sure that everyone had a good experience. That's what I do differently.
Okay. That was a minute of him talking about how he would change his past behavior. And I think it was arguably, other than the story that he shared, that was probably the most effective apologetic minute. And it was also the most simple. He's saying, hey, I'd listen to people more. Hey, I would do everything I can to make people feel more valued or more respected. It's simple verbiage, and apologies don't have to be complex. Honestly, they're much more effective if they're not complex. You want simple verbiage. That being said, I don't think that it was a good apology, this whole conversation. I think that, let's see, there's 8 seconds left. Let me make sure I fulfill my promise.
Dan, I appreciate your time.
I appreciate you.
Thanks for stopping by, man.
Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate your time. Thanks for stopping by. Back to the warm, jolly, positive language. Some people may be watching like, well, is he supposed to be mad at him? It's like, that's true. That's not exactly his. As an interviewer, you can be happy or mad. You just have to elicit conversation. That's what he's doing. But it does stand out to me like, hey, I'm really happy to be here. Hey, this is really good. The emotional impact is not there. We're not seeing that. Rather, what we saw was a conversation where they tried to accomplish several things at once. And I think in doing so, they really didn't accomplish much. They tried to defend reputation. They tried to explain logically why things were done. They tried to express sorrow and express devastation for the people who were affected. But all of these different targets and trying to hit them all at the same time. It's like whenever you have 3 different targets, but you only have 1 arrow, you're not going to have a good shot. You have to eliminate these targets to where you only have 1, and then you check the box. You fill that in. And that didn't happen. And watching this, we need to know apologies are very complex. It takes effort. It takes thought to genuinely apologize because it requires vulnerability and it requires consideration of another person, empathy. And if you are watching this and you're interested in all of this, then you found the right YouTube channel. And honestly, I'm working on a resource that I just finished to help people communicate more clearly and confidently the ideas that are core to them. And that may be an apology, or that idea may be the idea that's promoting your business or helping you live a fuller life. And I don't want us to not be able to communicate clearly. So I have a link in the description below. This is free. The only thing I ask of you is for you to give me feedback. It's going to be 7 different emails. I built them all out. They all add value. That's my goal. If they don't add value, you can always unsubscribe, but I would love your feedback. In addition, join the Patreon community. It's free to join. I have my video podcast on there called the Talk to People podcast, all about having better conversations, relationships, and community. You can watch the video podcasts on there. Also, we talk in there about new episodes. What should we have an episode about, or about past episodes? So both of those are important resources, but the whole purpose of us being here is to look at apology that didn't go well, because rather than having 1 target, they had 3. So throughout the rest of your day, don't have 3 targets, focus on 1, and I hope you hit the bullseye. We'll see you next time.